G'day and welcome to the program. I'm David Lipson. The Qantas board is rallying around CEO Alan Joyce after the government dashed Qantas's hopes for financial assistance. The Transport Minister, Warren Truss, has told the Australian newspaper that the future for Qantas doesn't seem to be dependent on the need for a government guarantee. He believes the company is quite a long way from being at a critical point. Joining me now to discuss this is the Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Andrew Lee. Andrew Lee, thanks for your time.
Pleasure, David.
What do you make of those comments?
Well, I think it is worrying that the government has turned down the thing that Qantas has asked for, being a debt guarantee, and is instead floating something that Qantas hasn't asked for, which is changes to the Sale Act. At the moment, foreign ownership of Qantas sits at around 39%. It can go to 49% under the Act. So, really, what we're looking at here is the government wanting to change the Act in such a way that you would see a full foreign takeover of the airline, and effectively you'd lose your national carrier.
But on the debt guarantee that the government seems to have ruled out for now, Virgin is bleeding money as well. So the government should think very carefully before picking winners, as John Borghetti said, shouldn't it?
Well, what I'm troubled by in particular with this is the government laying down a test in December after Qantas's debt was reduced to junk bond status. Joe Hockey laid out a four-part test around things like whether the company is a strategic interest, whether it's constrained by legislation, which I think sent a very clear signal that he was open to a debt guarantee for Qantas. And then now to turn around and rule it out leaves management in some great difficulty, I would imagine.
Parliamentary Secretary Josh Frydenberg joins us now from Melbourne. Josh, thanks for your time as well. Warren Truss's comments that Qantas is a long way from being at a critical point. They just shed 5,000 jobs. How does that work?
Look, our position is that we want to help Qantas stay prosperous and a great Australian airline. The way we can do that is to remove the carbon tax. You see, David, at the end of the day, Qantas has a $106 million carbon tax bill just this year. So you combine their carbon tax bill this year and next, and you're nearly at the amount of their recently announced loss. So that's a major way we can help the company.
But it doesn't level the playing field, though, does it? Because if you got rid of the carbon tax, that would get rid of the carbon tax for Virgin as well. And although Virgin has very clearly said that that's what they want, everyone wants to get rid of a tax, it wouldn't level up the field, would it?
No, it absolutely does reduce their costs and allows them to compete on those international routes against other companies and to employ more Australians. So, you know, what Bill Shorten is doing is being a real problem for Qantas. It's time Bill Shorten becomes part of the solution for Qantas, gets out of the way in the Senate and allows the carbon tax repeal legislation to go through. And the second thing we want to do...
I will get to the second thing. I'll come back to you. I just want to stick on this point because we're on the carbon tax. Andrew Lee, John Borghetti couldn't have been clearer. He was absolutely clear when he said scrapping the carbon tax was the best thing that could be done to help this industry.
And if you want to fall on the carbon price, David, then you want to support Labor's measures to move to a floating price from the 1st of July. That's something that we were very clear about in the last election and would achieve about 2/3 price fall in the carbon price. So anyone who is advocating this kind of position ought to be supporting an immediate move to the ETS, one that still allows us to reduce our emissions rather than backslide on the issue of climate change.
And Josh Frydenberg, you wanted to make another point?
Yeah, the second is about the level playing field when it comes to the restrictions under the Qantas Sale Act. And we have said for a long time that those restrictions should be lifted, and we would look to Bill Shorten and the Labor Party to give us support in the Senate for such legislation should it go through. So I just believe that Bill Shorten is the one who needs to get out of the way now and to help Qantas when we have a couple of stated positions which we certainly believe will make sure Qantas stays an effective Australian airline.
Just a quick point and we'll move on.
It's important to recognise where this would leave Australia. And having overseen the end of the Australian car manufacturing industry, we would then be a country effectively without a national carrier. I just worry that this is a kind of little Australia vision, which Australians weren't told about before the election. We're an affluent nation, and I think we ought to be in a position where we can have a car industry and where we can have a national airline. The Coalition don't appear to believe that.
All right. Well, look, talking of an affluent nation, workplace laws, and Andrew Lee, your old colleague Martin Ferguson, was he right to call for Labor to allow the ABCC to return and changes to workplace laws?
I respect Martin Ferguson enormously, but I think he's wrong on this point. Certainly if you look at the statistics, the lousiest period of Australian productivity growth in my lifetime was the period in which we had work choices. Productivity was better before and after work choices. And
he's a former ACTU secretary, though. He knows what he's talking about.
I certainly respect Martin Ferguson, but I respect Josh Frydenberg as well, and he and I can have respectful disagreements. The point here is that I think that we saw fewer deaths on the construction site after we got rid of the Building and Construction Commission, and if you want growth and jobs, the evidence, not ideology, tells you that going back to work choices isn't the answer.
A somewhat predictable answer, Josh Frydenberg, drawing a comparison to work choices. But clearly this is something that the government is concerned about. Tony Abbott hardly embraced the comments from Martin Ferguson yesterday. He was very cautious in welcoming them.
Well, firstly, Martin Ferguson has broken from the pack, and he's given his Labor brother, Bill Shorten, a bit of a lesson in leadership here. Because what he has said is, as a son of a bricklayer, he knows a bit about the construction industry. And the first thing that Martin Ferguson wants is what the coalition government wants, and that's to see the reinstatement of the Australian Building and Construction Commission. You see, the Australian Building and Construction Commission, David, came into place after the Coal Royal Commission, which found that we needed a cop on the beat, that there was lawlessness in that sector. In fact, when it was introduced, the number of days lost to industrial disputation for every 1,000 employees went from 224 days lost in 2004 to just 24 days lost in 2006. They're the numbers that Andrew Lee and Bill Shorten failed to understand and failed to recognise. As a result of the ABCC, we saw much greater productivity on workplaces, and particularly in the construction industry, and that's why we need to bring it back. And Martin Ferguson has sent a very, very important message about that. The other thing Martin Ferguson made very clear was that certain unions are stifling productivity, and he picked out the Maritime Union, but he also talked about red and green tape and the need to cut red and green tape if we are going to have more efficient industry. So at a time when we are seeing job losses across the economy, we need new measures in place, like the deregulation agenda, like better workplace relation laws, like the Australian Building and Construction Commission, and they were the words that came out of Martin Ferguson's mouth, not from the coalition's.
Okay, look, I want to turn to the issue of asylum seekers, Manus Island, and a powerful story from Paul McGough, who is reporting for Fairfax. He's been to Tehran in Iran and has met with the family of Reza Barati, who are mourning the 23-year-old asylum seeker's death. He's also spoken to other grieving relatives. One said that Saddam Hussein never treated Iranian POWs the way Australia treated his brother-in-law. Josh Frydenberg, what do you make of those comments?
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about Iraq and Iran, they had a decade-long war where 1 million people died. So I don't think those comments certainly live up to scrutiny. Look, what happened in Manus, in the death of that young man, is a tragedy, and certainly we are doing everything we can to ensure there's not a repeat of that violence. But we were given a mandate, David, by the Australian people at the last election to introduce our measures to restore integrity to border protection. And it is working. It's now more than 70 days since a boat has arrived in Australia. That's a significant departure to the record that occurred under the previous government. And not only is that saving taxpayers tens of billions of dollars, but it's also ensuring that people do not lose their lives at sea. And more than 1,000 people lost their lives at sea under Labor's watch. So these are tough measures, and obviously some people do not like them. But they are proving to be effective, and they are consistent with the mandate that we had from the Australian people at the last election.
Andrew Lee, I think we've got some of the pictures of Reza Barati's grieving relatives that hopefully we'll be able to roll for you. But what do you make of his comments and the response to Josh as well? But I sort of wanted to focus just on the comments from his family. It's not pretty, is it?
It's a tragedy, and he's a young man with his whole life ahead of him. I think one of the real challenges in Manus Island is that when we set up the refugee resettlement arrangements in government and then saw that 90% fall in boat arrivals before the election, it was always predicated on refugees being resettled in Papua New Guinea. And what worries me is that we haven't seen that now begin to occur. I would like to see the government working more constructively with Papua New Guinea in order to see asylum seekers resettled, because I think some of the issues that are occurring in the Manus Island Detention Centre arise because of the lack of resettlement, as was supposed to happen under the arrangement. But certainly the independent investigation will be important here. I'm pleased to see that's been set up, and that really needs to look into the circumstances of this tragic death.
All right, another issue entirely, and several Labor MPs have told me how annoyed they are about Stephen Conroy's attack on Lieutenant General Angus Campbell. Andrew Lee, could he really be the Defence Minister if Labor wins government after these comments? He's retracted them, but still not apologising.
No, Senator Conroy has, as you say, retracted them, and certainly my support for the Defence Forces couldn't be stronger. Within my electorate of Fraser is the Australian Defence Force Academy, and I'm going this morning to see their next class of graduates. It's an impressive institution. We have a great military, and I'm very proud to represent them in Parliament.
Josh Frydenberg, we're very short on time, but would an apology really end the matter, or would that just lead to the coalition calling on him to resign?
Well, an apology must be made here, and what we've just learnt in recent days was this was a premeditated attack by Senator Conroy, because he was counselled by his colleagues prior to his comments not to go down that path. Now, Bill Shorten faces a real test of leadership here. He needs to get his buddy Stephen Conroy to apologise, because there's huge damage being done while he doesn't. And the other thing Bill Shorten did during the week, which was unacceptable, is he launched an attack in the Parliament on Senator Ronaldson about comments that he never made. Then he came back into the Parliament to apologise. Those sort of hit-and-run tactics are very dangerous, and they undermine what should be bipartisan support for our military and on national security matters.
OK, we've got under a minute left. I just wanted to finish on Fiona Nash, the Assistant Health Minister. Now we see that the Alcohol and Drug Council has shut its doors after having funding cut. Andrew Lee, are there any further questions in relation to that need to be answered by the Assistant Minister?
Well, shutting down the Alcohol and Other Drugs Council, I think, was a terrible mistake, David. We know we've got big challenges with drugs as a whole plethora of designer drugs hit the street. And any government that wants to act seriously on alcohol-fuelled violence needs expert advice.
No conflict of interest in relation to Alastair Purnival in that one?
Well, I think it's really important that we work out what this man's involvement was, and that we don't have these sort of conflicted lobbyists working in government. It does seem to be contrary to the high ministerial standards, the adults in charge that we were promised before the election.
Josh Frydenberg, just 20 seconds. Does that... he's now resigned. Is that enough?
Certainly it is, and that's the end of the matter. And Fiona Nash is an excellent minister, working hard for her constituents and doing a terrific job in that important portfolio.
Josh Frydenberg, Andrew Lee, we covered a lot of territory there. Thank you both very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Josh.
Nice to be with you.
After the break, we'll have more on Saturday Agenda. Stay with us.